Welcome back to the GovAI Podcast, and today we're joined by Andrew Ngui, Chief Digital Officer for the City of Kansas City. Andrew leads the city's work at the intersection of digital innovation, data, and responsible technology adoption. His work's focused on translating emerging technologies like AI into the real operational improvements for government, while building governance and organizational structures and systems required to make them sustainable. Andrew's perspective is really interesting and valuable because the approach to AI is not just about the technology challenges, but also as a leadership and organizational one. Andrew, welcome to the show. Can't wait to jump into some of the topics today.
Noam, thank you for having me.
I'm going to start actually from the title itself, Chief Digital Officer.
Yeah.
That packs a lot in it. So what does that role look like? Unpack it for us, and specifically for you and your role in the city.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for the question. What does it even mean to be a chief digital officer? And so I did look it up. The difference between a chief innovation officer and a chief digital officer, really it's the idea that we're much closer to the business outcomes. And so while innovation is the front end, you could argue that the digital office, really, it's about tangible outcomes, not just the outputs, right? Because there's this whole journey of innovation. And innovation by default is somewhat disruptive. The work that we're particularly focused on is similar to the concept and, of course, the work that is being done in the healthcare field in minimally invasive surgery. What we're really going for here is minimally invasive innovation, so that we can reduce trauma at the site in which we're looking to innovate, and how might technology actually fit into the pre-existing ecosystem, pre-existing culture, pre-existing workflow and process in a way that fundamentally accelerates the organization, but at the same time minimizes any sort of trauma or wounds, as I'm speaking about healthcare in the organization.
On that, where did AI intersect first? When was that moment that you said, okay, now this is starting to become something I need to pay attention to, and how I bring it into our city?
Yeah, so I think this was in 2023 when I was still a Fuse Executive Fellow that was attached to the city. My work was in World Cup and the future of transportation, rapid transportation in the city. Obviously, with ChatGPT, that was an opportunity that launched at that time, and we had to write an RFP. So part of that RFP was the ability to leverage ChatGPT to create an outline, and then from that outline, that led to a number of different things, and then the realization that generative AI can truly be a game changer going forward.
So I'm curious, Andrew, great to see you again. There's so many problems that you can apply AI to tackle. And we see oftentimes some jurisdictions will just deploy AI for the sake of having an AI tool and hope for, some magical outcome. But how do you approach this, right? As you think about the multitude of different challenges that you can apply it to, how do you decide where AI is worth actually, experimenting?
I am not, by any stretch of the imagination, haven't been in government very long. So I'll reference the startup analogy of your candy, vitamin, and painkiller, right? Candy is good to sweet to eat. Vitamins are beneficial, and painkillers are a special type of drug or medication because it immediately solves a particular pain point. And so using that as a reference, we're coming back to the organization and saying, hey, what is the most painful problem that you're currently experiencing? And if we're able to solve that, how might that actually move the needle, not just from the output perspective, but also the outcome to the people that we serve, our residents, our customers, I guess, if you can call them that. And more importantly, we have internal customers too. We have, staff, and there's this collaboration aspect going on within the organization. But then ultimately that also serves at the end the public. That's really the heart of how we think about addressing it, is really the use cases. And, Dustin and Noam, I've shared this multiple times, and you're probably tired of hearing this, is the use cases that we already know about, and also the use cases we haven't even begun to imagine yet. And so significant focus on what are the key use cases that will make a difference.
On that topic, so a lot of our listeners are entrepreneurs, founders. Some of them are public sector CIOs and leaders and even mayors and others. But what I'm guessing that you get approached by AI applications or vendors, how many times a month, a week, would you say?
All the time.
A day.
Yeah.
Let's play the game more than 10 times a month, something like that.
Easily. There's one that constantly calls me up every other day. Yeah.
So first of all, I would imagine that's not the right strategy, vendors out there. But it's rare that you get to have an open conversation to those vendors from the outside saying, what is the right way to cut through the noise? And I'm asking this from two sides of it. So as a city, how do you evaluate the flood of new AI vendors coming in and you decide which one you actually pay attention to and listen? And from the other side, if you're the vendor, what is the right approach to actually get the attention and result and traction that you're looking for from you?
Great question, Noam. So I'll say it this way. The first thing that we're trying to do, coming back from Miami, was it 2 weeks ago? So the Miami-Dade Innovation Authority has a innovation challenge model. We've seen this with a number of different organizations that have started in DC and others, which we've participated in. And then I think going forward, one of the things that we're specifically looking into is how can we run a public innovation challenge that will be able to solicit responses from vendors in a consistent way that can be evaluated consistently in a particular time frame, once a year or twice a year, that kind of thing, right? And then that levels the playing field in terms of really articulating, first of all, the issue that we're trying to solve. And then the other part on the other side, on the vendor side, it's really understanding, can the vendor, first of all, solve the issue that we've articulated, but more importantly, how are they thinking about it from a broader systems perspective? Because as you know, everything somehow in the government is connected to something else, whether we know it or not. And more often than not, sometimes we don't know it until after the fact in implementation. And then suddenly that becomes the road bump or the pothole, whichever you would like to call it. The other part I would also say from the vendor perspective is primary market research. If you look at the work that has been coming out of MIT, it's called the Discipline Entrepreneurship, a book. It is 24 Steps to Startup Success. A key aspect of that is primary market research and doing the hard work of deeply understanding what are the pain points. And especially with government, information is public. And so you get to see it in media, you get to see it in council meetings, you get to see it in all sorts of different ways. And so then the question is, you can keep calling me, but if you don't have a position, if you don't have a particular frame in which you can say, hey, I saw from a particular article that these are the different things, and you can put two and two together, right? And of course, we're in the age of AI. AI is eating up, generative AI is eating up everything. Why aren't we leveraging that in a way that is more productive? The other part to that too is, I would say, are you engaging with, as an example, again, the GovAI coalition led by the city of San Jose, where there's a collaborative platform for procurement. There's a base for shared contracts. There's a location for shared contracts. But I really go back to the issue of, if you don't truly understand the pain point of the agency that you're looking to reach, then I think you're doing yourself a disservice. And you're also doing the agency a disservice, particularly if you're looking to engage with them over time.
I want to double click on that. Give me an example without, obviously, you don't have to give vendor names and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
Give an example where they got your attention, they're coming in, they're giving their perspective on a solution. It fits to what your needs are, and it's clicking to something that is progressing or there's real conversations happening.
So what that could look like would be immediately, yes, we want to do this. This is a priority issue for us. And so this is why there's hard nose and soft nose, right? But ultimately we want to get to the quick nose. And that is a graciousness that not everybody appreciates, right? Because can you imagine you invest the long tail of 6 months just to get a no at the end versus like, hey, how about let me not waste your time and let me give you a quick no now. But this is now. It's just a snapshot in time, given the current conditions. It's not necessarily a no in the future. If the priorities change, at least the ability to have this relationship that we can have a conversation. So I think it's a very different approach. Prospecting done right, really primarily in my mind, is a lot of research. It's a lot of front-loaded homework to understand the organization that you seek to engage with. And I find that there are not many people who are actually willing to invest the time and effort to actually do a deep dive.
Yeah. But one quick follow-up to that, because I think that's great. You're spewing gold, Andrew. So I think a lot of vendors should take note of this. But as you think about this, oftentimes, like we've just seen some data from GovTech in terms of like overall IT spend is now expected to surpass $160 billion. And sometimes it's like, oh, well, there's tons of money here. But then you're balancing that with the reality of your budgetary environment, the constraints that are there. So talk to me a little bit about like if you could tell the industry anything about like the budgetary picture here, like what would you tell them like in terms of how to navigate that seasonality of it, reality of it, right? Like where does that intersect this conversation?
So again, I go back to startup land or startup world, right? Like just because you see money, it doesn't mean that it's all there. It doesn't also mean that it's there in the time frame by which you want it. And the numbers actually tell a story more than just the numbers itself. So you can see, oh, well, was it $160 billion? But that's just aggregate. It doesn't tell you the financial year start and end. It doesn't tell you what the pre-allocations are. It doesn't tell you what has been allocated for CapEx versus OpEx. It doesn't tell you all the variety of the details. And so if you truly want to understand and know and learn about what they're doing, again, coming back to public sector, all the information is out there. Our budgets are out there. The allocations are there. Now the question is, how does that resonate with you, and how does it? Are you willing to do the homework to actually do that level of digging to understand about opportunities?
Yeah, I love that. So let's shift back to the agency side of things, because I think as we think about where agencies are intersecting the AI conversation, there's the chicken and the egg dynamic. And we see this across the country where it comes to the policy or the non-policy when it comes to approaching AI. So as you think about starting an AI journey, I'm a city, I'm a county, where do I need to have guardrails, policy, kind of rules of engagement in place, or do I learn and experiment first? How do you kind of approach that, or how do you see that kind of that seesaw there?
Great question. Of course, the easy answer would be you have to have the rules in order to know how to engage within a particular space, right? So the work that we are doing here at the city is particularly focused, again, on the use case, having a baseline policy in place, having them become standards. In our case, they are part of the IT user policy because, again, AI is a tool. And so does it make sense to integrate? That's kind of where we're at. The longer version of that answer is it has to start with what is the leadership's vision? Because you can create all the different types of guardrails, you can create all the different types of governance aspects, but if that's not what the leadership wants, you just have to think. And how do you apply it? That's really the hard part.
And what's your take on the play between governance and innovation, or the fear that the more you put governance, it creates innovation paralysis? Sometimes that's how people look at it. What's your sense of the play there between the two sides?
So let's talk about basketball for a second, right? You have the demarcations of where the court is, the demarcations on which side of the court you're playing from. And so if you do not have those lines, you really don't have a game to play because you don't know where it's inbounds or out of bounds. Similarly, certainly you have to have some level of guardrails and guidelines in place. But at the same time, I do think there needs to be some level of flexibility in what that could look like from an architectural perspective, because things change and your documents have to be living documents. And what was good yesterday may not necessarily be good 6 months from now.
I may have to steal that analogy
Oh,
next
of
time I'm
course.
talking about governance and
Yeah.
governance innovation. I like it. And so it's a good segue, I think, as we're talking about governance, but now talking about the use cases that you mentioned several times. Let's double down on that. So when we start thinking about actually applying AI within the city, what are the places that you think it's going to have the biggest impact? Where are those automations and workflows you think that are most ripe for adoption, and the ones where vice versa you think they could have a big impact, but they're further down the road, there needs further maturity within a city to really get some success?
So I think a lot of work that we're doing now is internal. So we have a number of different custom Copilot chatbots that HR of all departments, we're very proud of them. After a 5-minute call with our HR, one of our HR leads in our education and development department, he had a light bulb moment, and then he went off to start creating 3 chatbots. And that 3 chatbots for internal HR processes led to 6 chatbots. And now, as of January, they have 8 chatbots, and that it doesn't show any sign of slowing down. So that's just one example. Certainly, we have a number of different chatbots on our website that started with our small business office, BizCare. We're pilot testing a voice AI. And even the airport is piloting a voice AI that you can actually scream at. Like it's super cool.
Tell me more about that. What do you mean by scream at?
So they worked with the vendor and actually you could look it up on YouTube. There's an AI that you can actually scream at. But anyways, that was really interesting because they were trying to get to a place. This particular vendor was trying to get to a place where it is almost indistinguishable from a human person, and with even keel temperament, especially for high pressure circumstances or scenarios. And I can certainly see how that could be helpful in very specific instances. And of course, how that can expand beyond that.
I need to go and scream at that AI to give it a little bit of test. But I think it's an interesting point, though, in terms of not screaming at AI. But another challenge that we see isn't just where to start, but it's also like this build versus buy kind of dynamic as it relates to AI. And so how do you approach that? How are you thinking about AI in that context?
It's always a great question of build versus buy. Then it becomes a question of what is your IT strategy? Are your outliers becoming the norms? Certainly in a number of different conversations that I've had, the outliers have become the norms, and so as a result, it looks like the pendulum is swinging to the other direction of looking for more off-the-shelf, configurable solutions, and this is a procurement thing. And so the difference between customizable and configurable are two very similar yet very distinct terms. From a procurement perspective, I'll just harp on this for a little bit because it's exactly the point that you're referencing, which is customized versus configurable. And if we are moving away from a outlier situation becoming the norm, then it has to be more configurable than customizable in that sense. But more broadly, also just wanted to speak to your second part of the question, which is, well, how should the organization be really thinking about responsible AI deployment? It is, at least in my mind, a question about what is the future of human work and how are we redesigning our work in the age of AI and beyond. Just because we've done something a particular way and we recognize that our individual contributors are experts, should we actually be digitizing or automating those processes in those particular ways? Or what this guy who wrote in HBR, Michael Hammer, I think 1990 or somewhere there, he was saying something along the lines of obliterate the particular workflow or process, because digitizing a manual paper process does not necessarily fit the current age, right? And so if you're looking at digitization versus true transformation, we really need to be thinking about how we're redesigning our work, how we're redesigning our day, how we're redesigning our focus in the way by which AI can be by default helpful versus after the fact.
This kind of just raises a question that came up, which you're talking about the employees themselves and how they're interacting with AI. How do you think the workforce should transform itself to, there's two sides of this. One is educate and be ready for using the tools. It's a whole different workflow for some who've never engaged with it. And then B, the elephant in the room, and I would say in large part for those that haven't engaged with AI, is the big fear of it's going to take my job. So how do you manage the change management and the education of the workforce that has to happen at the same time?
So I'll come back to a very basic concept. Fire is a great tool, but a really bad master, right? So we've seen this before. Similarly, in the modern era, when we were transitioning from art to applied art, or shall we call it design, the artists were all up in arms. So this is not a new thing in the sense that from a technological perspective, it's a new thing. But conceptually, there has been things before that have also come along a similar way. And so this gets into the, again, startup world, right? You have to go top down, but you have to also go bottom up, right? So if we see that there's efficiency gains as it relates to production work, particularly from individual contributors in your organization, then there needs to be adequate training, then there needs to be an invitation to staff by default. And so I'm a very big proponent of defaults, which is really a behavioral change concept, which is basically to say like, hey, you know, the position that you find yourself in is generally the position in which you stay in until an opposing force is acted upon it. Obviously, in physics, we see that. But more importantly than not, sometimes our default positions are not necessarily the best positions to be in. Why is it that we constantly and continually have to keep asking for permission if we already work for the environment? And so that position should, in my mind at least, shift to like you, because you work for the organization, you already pre-enrolled, you're already pre-invited by default, and it is upon you to accept the invitation. So similarly, this is our open access policy, right? In terms of our AI upskilling. So in the case of, we had what we called AI January earlier this year. We had 4 classes for executives and leaders, and we had 4 intro classes for staff. And so that was exactly it. They were already pre-enrolled. They had to accept the invitation. And this is if you're interested in engaging, if you're interested in upskilling, if you're interested in any sort of career growth, learning how to leverage AI in a way that makes sense for you.
Fascinating. We now added physics into the conversation.
We got sports and physics, and this has been great. So you have great stuff, Andrew.
Yeah, and I actually have a YouTube video on my channel that speaks to the innovation loop. And so, you know, we have build, measure, learn, right? But build, measure, learn is in a 2D space. But what if you add a time element to it? Suddenly it becomes a spiral. And what if we're able to add different variables to that build, measure, learn loop? Suddenly we're layering change management. Suddenly we're layering tech readiness levels. Suddenly we're laying all these different things. And then collectively, as it spirals, we leverage the idea, again, of physics, of the gravitational slingshot. We see that happen with comets. We see that happen with satellites. We see that happen with planets. And it accelerates and it grows faster and we hit the bullseye faster.
All right, now we're going to transition to a fun part. We're going to have a little fun and do some rapid fire. So we're each going to hit you with a question and kind of get your single answer on it. So I'll start. One habit every government leader should build.
Sense of urgency.
Love it.
One early warning sign an AI project is failing?
It does not fit into the workflow that your staff are willing to execute on.
One workflow cities underestimate for automation.
Everything else beyond the pilot. The technology integration, the data alignment, the people.
Okay, and on that line of thought, what's one thing that AI will make obsolete in government?
I wouldn't say that it would be made obsolete. I will say that there's an opportunity to reduce friction. And you could position friction as red tape or bureaucracy. I will say that there are instances where bureaucracy is important because the timescales in which that government operates are in the decades and the centuries. Similarly, a water pipe is a 100-year-old gift.
Yeah.
All right. One capability cities must develop internally.
Resiliency, perseverance.
Absolutely. And I think that's true, not just on the technology side, but on every aspect of it. Let's end with this closing question. If we could actually do this, we are sitting here again in 3 years from now, what would need to happen that you would reflect back and say that your city figured out how to use AI well? You're on the right path. There's success. What does that look like?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I recently shared a post about what is the future of, or architecting the future of scalable government. And I think it's translating the "it depends" response from humans to be able to then translate that into a more deterministic logic flow with the context, with the nuance, so that technology can actually do what technology does best, and it frees up the time to allow for humans to do in what they do best.
Amen. I think we all want to live in that city. Andrew, really appreciate this conversation. It's refreshing, and we got to bring in physics, basketball, different analogies here, which made it interesting as well, and shared some of your examples. So thank you for giving us a peek into how things work in government. This is exactly what the goal of this podcast is, and for our listeners, is to give a peek behind the curtain and look inside government beyond the headlines and the hype that we often see. So thanks for being us, and we'll see everyone again on the next episode of GovAI.
Thank you.